No, I completely understand what you're talking about, and let's put this into perspective. When you were in the Cleveland comedy market, you had far, far less performing opportunities than you did when you moved to the New York comedy market. My point is this. It doesn't matter what market you're in. You need to be able to make improvements quickly, because every time you go on stage, I don't care if it's in Cleveland, Detroit, Dallas, Los Angeles, whatever, you need to be able to make improvements quickly, because your improvements, and you already talked about this, are relative to the amount of performing time that you get. Now, granted, you can get on 2 times a night in New York. That doesn't happen in any place other than New York, L.A., and possibly San Francisco. Right. Outside that, if you're going to make any measurable improvements at any speed, you need to know where you're at with your stand-up comedy act. Let me get your feedback on that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And again, you need to make those measurable improvements every time, and you've got to also be able to evaluate yourself properly. And what I mean by that, and we've talked about this offline as well, is that I think one of the biggest problems is people do not know how to evaluate themselves. And, that's where the Evaluator Pro has helped me so much, because it does put hard numbers to it where you could see kind of the science behind the art, I guess, you know what I mean? And it's like you see that there's only 2 things happening, like you say, either you're talking or they're laughing, and you can measure those things. And
Well, one of the things that I think is so important is feedback from other comedians or whoever it may be is generic at best. Hey, you had a good set. Hey, you had a great set. There's no improvement information in those kinds of comments. There's none.
Yeah, and I think that there's 2 things that I have to say about that. First of all, my biggest thing is when I say they don't know how to evaluate themselves properly, and neither did I before I found the software and your process, is that what does a good or great set mean? And that can, and also that's going to mean different things to different comedians at different stages too. I mean, someone that's not used to doing well and then gets up and does, fairly well. Like, I'll tell you what, like, I know a comedian that's somewhat new and just not used to doing that well, and then he had a set in front of a hot crowd where he did relatively well compared to what he normally does, and of course he was pumped up, and and rightfully so. I'm not trying to bash anyone or bring anyone down a peg. He had a good set, and he was and he was pumped up about it, and he posted the video, and when I ran it through the Evaluator Pro, it was about 11 seconds of laughter per minute. So I think it was like a par score of 20. And again, in front of a crowd of 35, 40 people, that's not bad, especially for someone that's not used to doing well. But the point is, if you don't have like a way to evaluate yourself and you don't have benchmarks that you're trying to reach, first of all, how do you know if that's good or not? And also, how do you know which areas to improve and where you should be striving for? So in other words, it gives you don't know how to evaluate yourself, you don't know where you stand, and then that leads to inconsistency because, one set might be okay, one set may not be okay, because you don't know where in your set to improve, what to cut out, what to change, you see what I'm saying? Like, you have no, and that's where the speed comes into it, because by the time you figure those things out, you may have been doing that crappy set for a year.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah, a year later you finally figure out, oh, well, this isn't working right here in this, where I can judge that immediately. I can judge it that very next day saying, okay, this minute something's not jiving here. You know what I mean?
Well, the big issue that I find is that if you don't have a performance benchmark, some way to compare your performances with like audiences. Understand, you can't compare your performance in front of 5 people with 40 people, with 100 people, but if you don't have a way to somehow benchmark your performances, you are stuck with complete trial and error. and you're working blind. You're working 100% blind to me.
Yep. And you know, the other thing it does real quick, I know this is kind of off a little bit on a tangent, but you said about, because I agree with you about the like crowds. But here's the other thing it does for me too. It gives me more confidence in the material itself when I do it in front of smaller crowds. Like, for instance, if I can get a headliner status par score, you know, say 30 or above, when I'm only performing in front of 20 to 40 people, then how much confidence does that give me to know that that material's ready? I mean, if I do that in front of a 300, you know, a sold-out improv show with 300 people, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's a layup. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Again, this comes back to this thing where other comedians or industry people or whoever they are, talent buyers, agencies, agents, saying you had a great set tells you nothing.
Right.
It gives you no specific information. It gives you no specific information on how to improve that set. And just to tie into what you have said, if somebody can produce 11 seconds of laughter per minute on average, which is a par score of 20, and just so that people know what a par score is nothing more than the percentage of laughter that happened in any minute. So if you hit a par score of 33, that means there's 60 seconds in a minute, you got 20 seconds of laughter. Well, 20 seconds of laughter in any minute is 33%. And that's really what a par score is. It's just a percentage of that.
Yeah.
But do you see what I'm saying? I mean, it gives you the ultimate feedback that you need without being dependent upon other comedians, comedy club managers, agents, bookers, what have you. And I think that's really important for folks that are at that 9, 10, 11, 12 seconds per minute average, because I'm going to tell you right now, if you can reach that, you can reach 15, 16, 17, 18 plus if you know what you're doing.
Well, that's a great point, and that's a great point, and that's where the evaluation is so important, because if you're not totally bombing, I mean, if you're getting enough laughter where you're getting 11 seconds, 12 seconds, then you're right. You're on to something that can be improved relatively quickly, you know, because you're not sitting there bombing getting nothing where you're starting from scratch. You know, I mean, you're obviously getting some sort of response, and that's where you can improve pretty quickly. The other thing that's interesting, too, when you talk about industry people and just comedians speaking about a set, it also gives you a way to compare your sets in different environments. Like I'll tell you, that night it was just one of those great energy nights. I mean, the crowd was hot. Everybody did relatively well. You know, even people that weren't really used to doing well did pretty well. So how do you evaluate yourself in that environment? Well, I'll tell you, I can put numbers to it. Like, I would expect that if I'm used to getting a certain response or being, you know, a certain par score above, you know, maybe some other comedians, you know, on that same bill, then I would expect that if they're doing well and the crowd is hot, that I should raise, my level should be even higher. And so it gives you a way to kind of say, well, yeah, it was a hot crowd and you had a great, you know, everybody did well. But I can also compare exact numbers. Like, for instance, in that night where that guy got, you know, a par score of 12 where he was getting, 12 seconds of laughter with a par score of 20, I got a 33 or a 34. 20 seconds of, 9 seconds more of laughter per minute is a huge difference. You know what I mean?
It is, and people don't realize how huge of a difference it is. And what people don't realize, too, is it's really just knowing how to restructure, how to edit your stuff to get that stuff. You know, keeping in mind that what you said is absolutely right on the mark is, you know, if people aren't getting the laughs they want, then their punchlines are not funny or they're running over laughs, or there's only a few things that you've got to be aware of, but you've got to be aware of those things if you want to make rapid improvement. I mean, I'll tell you what, I'm just not one of these guys that says, hey, you need to spend 5 years to get good at this stuff. Forget that. I'm allergic to that mentality about this. I really am.
And that's the beauty of it is you made a great point. There are only so many things it can be. There's only so many diagnoses it could be. Either your setups are too long, you're too wordy, your punches need to be better, your tags, more tags. I mean, there's only a few things that you can look at that are going to lead to big improvements. And when I talk about these scores too, I'm not like trying to be like, I don't want to sound like you're like talking like you're above anyone else, because I truly believe what you said, that if you're someone that can get 11 or 12 seconds of laughter per minute, you're very, very close. Like, you're already a funny person that's getting, it's not like you're not funny or you're not able to, like, you're obviously doing a lot of good things. So you're in the ballpark of very quickly making adjustments to be able to get up to that next level. You know what I mean?